Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to when you want to look past the surface, right into the source material to really understand how power works.
And today, we're digging into something fundamental. The actual blueprints, the strategies used by financial and industrial giants, historically and now.
Yeah, we're not just talking about getting rich, we're looking at how massive wealth is built, sure,
Mhm.
but also how it's used to shape the entire economic playing field, setting the rules, basically.
Exactly. And what's striking when you look at the sources is how consistent these core tactics are. It doesn't seem to matter much if it's steel, oil, software, or, complex financial instruments.
The goal is always about maximizing scale, controlling the variables, markets, labor, politics, you name it, and achieving dominance.
We're tracing that line from the railroad barons of the 19th century right up to today's tech moguls. It's the same fundamental DNA of economic power playing out again and again.
And it's definitely not passive. This isn't just about inheriting money. It's an active, often ruthless pursuit of consolidation, building dynasties, whether financial or corporate.
So let's unpack it. Where do we start? Probably makes sense to go back to the beginning, the original model.
Right. The Gilded Age. That seems like the place where the foundational blueprint was really hammered out.
Yeah. The Gilded Age. These guys were pioneers, operating in a landscape with, well, pretty minimal regulation compared to later.
And they really established the playbook, didn't they? It feels like it was all about aggressive integration, massive scale, and just calculated ruthlessness.
Absolutely. That ruthlessness wasn't just towards competitors. It extended to markets, suppliers, and very pointedly, to their own labor force.
When you talk about that kind of scale and aggression, Andrew Carnegie has got to be front and center. He wasn't just making steel, he was mastering the art of controlling the market itself.
He used his position against everyone, even his own partners sometimes, and definitely against huge companies like the railroads.
Tell us about that Coke production story. That really highlights his methods.
Right. So Carnegie makes this deal with H.C. Frick, who had massive Coke operations, Coke being essential for steelmaking. Carnegie buys a stake, half of Frick's works,
Okay, a significant investment.
a very significant investment. But the sources point out that Carnegie immediately started, quote, wildly exaggerating how much he actually controlled.
And that wasn't just ego.
Not at all. It was purely strategic. He weaponized that exaggeration almost instantly.
How so?
He goes straight to Robert Garrett, VP of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, a major transportation player, and he demands that the B&O slash its freight rates for him to match what the rival Pennsylvania Railroad was offering.
Just like that. Based on this exaggerated claim of control over Frick's Coke.
Pretty much. He used his control, or his claimed control over Coke, as leverage. He basically told Garrett, if you don't give me the rate I want, I'll ship every last ton of Frick's Coke exclusively on the Pennsylvania line.
Wow. So he's using vertical integration, controlling a raw material to dictate terms to a massive infrastructure company.
Precisely. It shows how owning one critical piece lets you bend other, much larger pieces to your will. It wasn't just about securing supply. It was about controlling the cost of transportation for the whole region, really.
That's financial warfare, using industrial control as a weapon. But his control wasn't just external, right? He applied the same ruthlessness internally to his workforce.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really key and frankly disturbing part of this Gilded Age blueprint. Carnegie understood that if his workers were too unified, especially skilled workers, they'd have too much power over wages.
So what was the strategy?
It was incredibly calculated. Even back in 1875, one of his top managers, a guy named Bill Jones, explicitly laid it out. They needed to create and maintain a, quote, tractable force.
Tractable meaning, controllable, easy to manage.
Exactly. And the method was deliberate division. Jones talked about mixing ethnic and regional groups, Germans and Irish, Swedes, and what I denominate buckwheats, young American country boys, judiciously mixed.
Just to keep them from getting along.
To keep them from unifying. To make sure they couldn't effectively organize against the company. If the workforce is divided along ethnic or regional lines, it's much harder for them to present a united front during disputes.
That's incredibly cynical.
It was standard operating procedure, and if that kind of internal division wasn't enough, things could escalate.
Like during strikes?
Yes. During major strikes, we see Carnegie's partner, Frick, who's known for being particularly hard-nosed, bringing in outside labor. Specifically, the sources mention Italian and African-American workers used as strikebreakers.
To break the strike, obviously, but what happened afterwards?
Often, Frick would allow these strikebreakers to keep their jobs after the dispute was settled. This sent a clear message to the original workforce. You are replaceable. It shifted the focus from fighting for better wages or conditions to just worrying about having a job at all. Employment itself became the one essential, as the source puts it.
Constant leverage. Constant threat.
And they use operational tactics too, like the strategic shutdown.
How did that work?
Take December 1887. The labor contract with the Knights of Labor, a really powerful union at the time, was about to expire at Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Works.
Okay, so negotiations are coming up.
Right. But weeks before the contract expired, management posted notices. The plant was closing temporarily. The reason given? Annual repairs.
But it wasn't really about repairs, was it?
Almost certainly not. It was a calculated move. By shutting down before negotiations, they stripped the workers of their main weapon, the ability to strike right when they needed it most.
Plus, it's December, right before the holidays.
Exactly. Workers face the holidays with no pay. It demoralizes them, weakens their position before they even get to the bargaining table. It shows the goal was never really fair negotiation. It was about strategic subjugation.
So Carnegie mastered that aggressive, vertically integrated control. If we move on, who represents the next evolution of this blueprint?
That really has to be John D. Rockefeller Sr. He took it to another level, the absolute systemic monopoly.
The name itself is synonymous with monopoly, even today.
For good reason. The speed and scale were just breathtaking. By the time he was only 38, Rockefeller controlled nearly 90% of all the oil refined in the U.S.
90%. It's hard to even wrap your head around that level of market saturation.
It required more than just being efficient, though Standard Oil was efficient. It required a kind of philosophical justification for tactics that were undeniably predatory.
How did he justify it?
He argued, quite forcefully, that his immense scale simply entitled him to better terms. He demanded huge discounts from railroads, for instance, rebates that his smaller competitors couldn't possibly get.
And his argument was?
He compared Standard Oil to a large commissary buying beef. The commissary buys in bulk, so it gets a much cheaper price per pound than a housewife buying for her family. He basically said, we ship massive volume, so we deserve massive discounts. If you achieve 90% volume, you're entitled to near monopoly pricing. That was the logic.
The logic of brute force.
Pretty much. But what's really interesting, and the sources highlight this, is that even with that near total control, maintaining it required a certain amount of, well, political theater.
Meaning a 90% monopoly is pretty obvious. Too obvious.
Exactly. It was too visible, too politically risky, especially in a democracy where people might start asking questions or demanding action.
So what did he do? Maintain an illusion?
That's exactly the word the source uses, an illusion. Standard Oil deliberately allowed maybe 100 tiny, isolated refineries to keep operating around the country.
Even though they were no real threat.
Rockefeller and his team knew they had zero competitive power. But these tiny players served a crucial purpose. They provided a mirage of competition. They allowed Standard Oil to claim politically that competition still existed, even when, economically, it had ceased to exist altogether. It was essential camouflage.
That takes calculation. And presumably, money.
Oh, immense political cost. Standard Oil was absolutely willing to pay bribes to keep systems in place that benefited them, like exclusive pipeline charters, which prevented competitors from easily transporting oil.
Do the sources document this bribery?
They mention one specific documented instance in the Pennsylvania legislature in 1887. But the broader political spending was huge. They even did things like hiring lawyers to pretend to be angry farmers, drumming up fake grassroots opposition to any proposed reforms that might hurt Standard Oil's control over pipelines.
Wow. So it wasn't just about building the monopoly, it was about actively paying to protect it from democratic interference.
They had to ensure the state's infrastructure, political and legal, continued to support their concentrated power.
Okay, so we have Carnegie's vertical integration and Rockefeller's systemic monopoly. What about the power of just individual will, sheer force of personality?
That's another key element of the Gilded Age. Figures whose personal drive seem to bend industries to their will. Cornelius Vanderbilt is the archetype here.
The Commodore.
Right. Described as the Colossus of Rhodes. The sources say he thought little of defying public opinion. He had the financial muscle and, frankly, the lack of concern about public approval to just push through his decisions.
And when he made a decision, it wasn't just a business move.
No, entire economies felt it. His personal choices had massive ripple effects. There's this amazing detail from a phrenological assessment, that pseudoscience where they felt the bumps on your skull.
Right, popular back then.
The assessment noted his skull showed immense will, self-reliance, and ambition. Now, phrenology is nonsense, but it tells you how people saw him as this overwhelming force of nature whose personal ambition was the driving factor.
So when he blocked a rival railroad, it was seen as a personal act of war.
Exactly. Waged not just against competitors, but against the public who relied on that infrastructure. It was the projection of individual will onto the economy.
And we see a similar kind of individual impact, though maybe in a different way, with the start of the Hughes fortune.
Yeah, that's a great example of technical dominance driven by one person's innovation. Howard Hughes Sr. didn't build his fortune through buyouts or monopolies in the same way. He solved a critical technical problem.
The problem of drilling through rock for oil.
Right. Before him, it was incredibly difficult. His invention, the Hughes rock bit patented in 1908, used these revolutionary rotating cones. It just works so much better than anything else.
And it became the standard.
The absolute industry standard.
Right.
Overnight, it created a technical monopoly. That single invention was the bedrock of the massive Hughes family fortune for decades. It's the blueprint of achieving dominance through a crucial technological breakthrough.
And that technical dominance is what allowed his son, Howard Hughes Jr., to inherit such vast wealth.
Precisely. Hughes Jr. became, at least on paper, the wealthiest oil man in Texas, inheriting this fortune built on his father's invention.
Even though he famously took the money and ran off to Hollywood, right? Never really engaged with the oil business himself.
Exactly. He fled Texas and the business. But that foundational technical monopoly secured the transfer of immense wealth and power across generations. The blueprint worked.
Okay, so the Gilded Age laid down these tracks, focused on controlling physical stuff, steel, oil, railroads. But the blueprint evolves, right? As we move into the modern era, what becomes the focus?
It shifts. It becomes much more about mastering speed, information, financial abstraction. Less about owning the physical plant, maybe, and more about owning the transaction, the data flow.
From industrial barons to financial engineers.
And the methods, while different on the surface, are often just as ruthless, maybe even more sophisticated because they're harder to see.
Where do we see this shift most clearly?
Well, the sources point strongly to the evolution of investment banking ethics. Or maybe the devolution.
How so? What was the old model?
The old model, think early Morgan Stanley, was generally about financing productive investment, funding General Motors to develop a new V8 engine, or helping IBM expand its capacity to build mainframe computers. It was geared towards creating tangible, long-term value in the real economy.
Okay. Investing in growth and innovation.
Right. But then you see this dramatic shift towards what the sources call financial manipulation. And the prime example of this is the rise of the leveraged buyout, the LBO.
Okay, LBOs. Break that down for us. What are we talking about?
Sure. So an LBO, in simple terms, is when a company gets bought, but the purchase is financed using a huge amount of debt. And often, the assets of the very company being bought are used as the collateral for that debt.
So the company itself is essentially paying for its own acquisition with borrowed money.
In large part, yes. And the goal often changed completely. It wasn't about long-term stewardship or growing the business anymore.
Well, what was it about then?
Rapid extraction. For many LBOs, the end game was to take the company private, maybe sell off valuable pieces, asset stripping cut costs drastically, and then crucially, take them public again at a later date and reap a quick killing.
So a short-term flip, basically, not long-term investment.
Exactly. The investment banker's role shifted. They went from being someone who connected capital with productive uses to being the main player, the principal, in these high-stakes, often short-term financial gambles.
But isn't there an argument that this is just maximizing shareholder value, driving efficiency, where, according to the sources, does it cross the line into manipulation?
That's a great question. The sources seem to suggest the line gets crossed when the pursuit of information and profit deliberately breaks the rules set up to keep the market fair, when it becomes about exploiting loopholes or, outright illegality.
Right, insider trading.
Insider trading is the perfect example from that era. The 1980s saw this gold rush mentality around it, and Dennis B. Levine is kind of the poster child for this in the sources.
What drove him? Just the money.
The money was obviously huge. But the sources suggest it was also about something else. The cachet, the status. He desperately wanted to be connected to the really big players, like the famous arbitrager Ivan Bujeski.
How did he try to connect?
He started mailing Bujeski confidential information about upcoming deals. Partly, yes, to potentially push up stock prices for his own benefit, but mainly, the sources say, for the cachet and for the information he might get back. It was like networking through crime.
That's quite a
Wow.
strategy. Did it work?
It worked spectacularly until it didn't. He made millions. But then it all collapsed. And there's this ironic twist.
What's that?
When the investigation started closing in, Levine ordered the destruction of evidence records held at his Swiss bank, Bank Lou.
Okay, covering his tracks.
Yes. But doing that actually removed the bank's best legal defense. If the records still existed, Bank Lou could have just invoked strict Bahamian secrecy laws, which might have stalled the U.S. investigators for years.
But because he destroyed them.
Because he destroyed them, the bank couldn't hide behind secrecy. They ended up facing prosecution in the U.S. for obstruction of justice. It shows how this kind of manipulation can just sort of eat itself. It consumed him and damaged his enablers.
So that's the manipulation of confidential information. Fast forward to the 21st century. What's the key resource being controlled now?
Milliseconds. Tiny fractions of time. The new frontier became market speed, and this is where high-frequency trading, or HFT, comes in.
Right, trading done by algorithms at incredible speeds.
It's a radical shift described in the sources. The old image of the bustling stock exchange floor. Vanishing. Trading isn't limited by how fast a human can think or act anymore.
What's the limit now?
Physics. Pure physics, the speed of light, essentially. How fast an electronic signal can travel through fiber optic cables between data centers, say, from the servers in Chicago where futures are traded to the servers in New Jersey where stocks are traded.
And this shift from human time to electronic speed created new inequalities.
Fundamentally, it institutionalized a whole new form of advantage.
The HFT firms figured out how to turn this tiny time difference latency, right, into a gold mine. How?
It was incredibly sophisticated. They basically mapped the electronic highway. They developed what the sources call latency tables.
Latency table.
Yeah. They figured out exactly how long it took for orders from different brokers to travel to the exchange's matching engine. Each broker had a unique electronic signature, a travel time.
Okay, so they could identify who was sending the order just by how long it took to arrive.
Exactly. And once they knew who was trading, they could use patterns to predict what they were likely doing. For instance, they see a small order, say 1,000 shares, come in from a known institutional broker.
They could guess that wasn't the whole order?
Right. They could predict with high probability that this was just the first slice of a much larger order, maybe 100,000 shares, that the institution was trying to execute without moving the market too much.
So the HFT firm sees that first small order.
And because they're faster, they can jump in front. They can buy up the available shares just milliseconds before the rest of the big institutional order arrives, and then sell those shares back to the institution at a slightly higher price.
They're essentially front-running, but legally, because it's based on speed and prediction, not inside information.
Legally, yes. They systematically skewed the odds in their favor, making tiny profits on millions of trades, all at the expense of the slower investors. It's like knowing the next card to be dealt.
And the ultimate expression of this speed advantage is physical proximity.
Yes, it's called co-location. It's brutally simple.
What is it?
HFT firms pay huge sums of money to put their computer servers in the exact same data center, sometimes just feet away from the stock exchange's own matching engine computer.
So their orders arrive almost instantaneously.
Pretty much. They get the market data microseconds before anyone else whose servers are even slightly further away. It eliminates even the tiny travel time down the fiber optic cable. The sources call it a pernicious inequality.
And was this just an unforeseen consequence? Or was it built into the system?
This is crucial for you, the listener, to grasp. The sources argue this inequality wasn't accidental. It was effectively baked into the system by regulations, specifically something called Regulation NMS, the National Market System.
Wait, regulation caused this? I thought regulation was supposed to make things fairer.
That was the intent. Reg NMS was designed to link all the exchanges electronically and ensure investors got the best price available across markets. But an unintended consequence was that it created this massive arms race for speed.
Benefiting those who could afford the fastest connections and co-location?
Overwhelmingly, it benefited a tiny class of insiders with the resources to achieve near-zero latency. It's like Rockefeller getting those exclusive pipeline charters, but now the pipeline is fiber optic, and the commodity is market data arriving fractions of a second faster.
Okay, that's the financial engineering side. Let's shift one more time within the modern blueprint. What about the tech titans? How do they fit the pattern?
They represent another evolution. Operational dominance defined by sheer intensity and often a weaponized corporate culture.
The scale of disruption they aim for is huge, right?
Terrifyingly huge. One source we looked at predicts that technically speaking, 40 to 50% of all U.S. jobs could potentially be automated within 15 years.
40 to 50%, that's staggering. How are tech leaders grappling with that?
Well, interestingly, the sources mentioned that Chinese tech elites often seem almost silent on the potential downsides. There's this genuine belief, apparently, that technology always creates more jobs in the long run, a kind of baked-in technological optimism, maybe bordering on willful blindness to the disruptive impact.
And the culture needed to drive that kind of disruption. It seems intense.
Intense is putting it mildly.
Mm.
It's often characterized as a kind of corporate warfare, a constant battle against the status quo, against perceived slowness.
And the anecdotes about the founders reflect this.
Absolutely. Think about Jeff Bezos having a honking laugh when recounting how someone suggesting they needed basic packing tables was seen as a brilliant idea in the early days of Amazon.
Meaning they were moving so fast, basic logistics were an afterthought.
Exactly. It shows the chaotic, raw energy. And the personal behavior often mirrors this pressure. Steve Jobs firing people in the elevator, Bill Gates' legendary tantrums, Steve Ballmer reportedly throwing chairs.
Is that just personality quirks, or is it part of the blueprint?
The sources suggest it's often endemic to industries where being always faster is the absolute key metric. Your disruption is the goal.
Like with Uber.
Uber's a prime example. Its whole trajectory under Travis Kalanick was defined by being always faster and more willing to use questionable tactics, like aggressively poaching top engineers and managers from their main rival, Lyft, specifically to cripple them while boosting Uber's own growth.
Move fast and break things, sometimes including the competition's R&D department.
Essentially, it's about operating at a velocity that regulators and established players just can't keep up with.
And for those who build these tech giants, is there a lesson they learn about power?
There often seems to be a moment of realization. The founders of Instagram, for example, had this moment after a conflict with an investor. They realized, quote, "Other people won't always be in this for us."
Meaning outside interests aren't aligned.
Right. It cemented for them the need for tight internal cohesion, trust among the core leadership, because external capital or partners might have very different agendas, especially when things get tough. You have to control your own destiny. #IV. Leveraging wealth for power and image. Okay, so the blueprint gets you the massive fortune, whether through industry, finance, or tech. But that's not the end game, is it? The next phase is crucial. Projecting that power.
Using the wealth to shape how people see you, what they think. Controlling the narrative, influencing politics.
Exactly. And here again, we can look back for the models. William Randolph Hearst was a master at integrating his media empire with his financial goals.
Hearst, the newspaper magnate, how did he leverage that?
So in 1930, he incorporated Hearst Consolidated Publications, Inc. And then he used his own newspapers, which were hugely influential, widely read, to sell stock in this company directly to the public.
Selling stock through newspaper ads?
Yes. And this was right in the middle of the Great Depression. The ads were specifically designed to play on people's fears. They showed, smiling, secure-looking families. They pitched the Hearst stock as a depression safety net, a guaranteed income stream in uncertain times.
Using the perceived authority and reach of his news outlets to push his own financial product.
It's the ultimate feedback loop. The media engine drives the financial engine. He built trust through journalism, then monetized that trust for his corporate finances.
Fast forward a bit, another media figure known for, let's say, intense maneuvers was Robert Maxwell.
Maxwell took defiance to another level. There's this instance where he was removed as president and chairman of Pergamon Press Inc. in America by the board in London.
Okay, so she was fired.
But he just refused to leave. He argued he couldn't be ignored because he was still the second largest shareholder. He was using his wealth to basically ignore corporate governance structures.
And he also played games with valuations.
Oh, absolutely. His empire was built on a mountain of debt, often secured by the shares of his public companies. So keeping those share prices high was critical.
How did he inflate them?
One tactic mentioned is having his private companies buy assets from his public companies at inflated prices. For example, his private Mirror Group bought a printing company, Quebecois Printing, from the public Maxwell Communication Corporation for reportedly 70% more than an independent buyer would have paid.
Making the public company look more valuable than it was to support its share price and his borrowing power.
Exactly. Financial engineering designed purely to maintain the facade and keep the loans flowing.
Moving beyond media and finance, how is wealth used to influence people more directly? Loyalty, political pull?
Well, Howard Hughes Jr., despite his eccentricities, seemed to understand psychological leverage.
How so? He wasn't exactly a hands-on manager later in life.
No, but he knew how to keep key people loyal. The sources describe his tactic with his longtime financial advisor, Noah Dietrich. Hughes apparently told Dietrich that he had rewritten his will to provide very generously for his top executives, including Dietrich.
Okay, promising them a big payout upon his death.
Right. But here's the crucial part. The sources state there's absolutely no evidence he ever actually executed such a will.
So it was just a claim, a carrot dangled.
It appears so. A stratagem. The promise of future wealth was enough to ensure Dietrich and others remained intensely loyal and kept managing his affairs, even during his long periods of seclusion. It's manipulation through expectation.
And on the political side, how does that direct influence work? The Rockefeller name comes up again here.
David Rockefeller's influence shows how established wealth translates into a kind of institutional deference, especially from the media.
What do you mean by deference?
His pronouncements were treated as major events, even if they weren't particularly newsworthy. The sources describe how editors at the New York Times, a pillar of journalism, would react.
How did they react?
Even if Rockefeller just made some remarks at, say, an art show opening, the top editors, like the legendary Abe Rosenthal, would treat it as politically significant. One bureau chief recalled Rosenthal saying, "Look, Dick, this is terribly important. I want you to drop whatever you're doing and get over there."
So automatic top-level coverage regardless of substance.
Pretty much. And then, crucially, the story that eventually ran would often be quite bland. The same bureau chief mentioned that after reporters filed their stories, the editors would carefully taken out the one or two barbs, any critical elements the reporter might have tried to include.
So the published result was sanitized.
Yeah, often appearing under a non-committal headline. It's a kind of self-censorship by the institution when faced with that level of established power. The wealth buys a shield against critical scrutiny. So we've seen these blueprints play out: industrial force, financial speed, technical dominance, political shielding. And the inevitable result, especially in recent decades, has been this really extreme concentration of capital.
Right. Let's put some numbers on that because the scale is really the takeaway for everyone listening. How concentrated are we talking?
Well, think about the U.S. in the 1970s. The top 1% of earners took home about 10% of the total national income.
Okay, 10%.
Fast forward about 35 years, say, to the mid-2000s. That same top 1%, their share had jumped to nearly a third of the national income.
From 10% to almost 33%.
Yeah, hitting levels of concentration not seen since. Well, since the original Gilded Age we started with. Structurally, we kind of ended up back where we began in terms of inequality.
And what does that look like in terms of wealth, not just income?
The sources give this incredibly stark comparison from 2005. You take just two people, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Their combined wealth back then was about $90.5 billion.
Okay, two individuals.
Now compare that to the bottom 40% of the entire U.S. population. That's 120 million people. Their combined wealth, about $95 billion.
So two guys had almost as much wealth as the bottom 120 million Americans combined.
Basically, yes. That's not just a gap, it's a chasm. It illustrates the sheer scale of capital concentration these blueprints can produce.
It feels like an unstoppable trend sometimes, but the sources also suggest history shows a way inequality can be reduced, right? There's a period in the 20th century where things became more equal.
Absolutely. And the explanation for that reduction is really interesting. It wasn't primarily about wages rising for the bottom. It was largely driven by the fall of high incomes derived from capital.
Income from owning assets, not from working.
Exactly. The decline of what economists call the rentier class. And just for listeners, a rentier is someone whose income comes mainly from owning things, stocks, bonds, property, capital, rather than from a salary or labor.
So why did the rentier income fall?
The main reason highlighted is that governments, particularly after the World Wars and the Depression, started taxing capital and high incomes at significant rates for the first time.
Taxes acted as a brake on accumulation.
A very significant break. And you can see the flip side if you look at the conditions before those taxes really kicked in.
Like the period leading up to the first Gilded Age peak, around 1900, 1910.
Precisely. That era of high wealth concentration was the result of two key factors coinciding for a long time. First, a long period without major destructive wars, and second, a period with almost no significant taxes on capital income or corporate profits.
So perfect conditions for fortunes to grow exponentially and be passed down intact.
Ideal conditions. And when those checks, major wars and significant capital income taxes were weakened or removed again in the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
The concentration started accelerating again.
Exactly. The sources show this very clearly with inheritance taxes, for instance. In the U.S., the top marginal rate, the tax on the wealthiest estates, was 70% in 1980.
70%, that's high.
Very high. By 2013, it had dropped to 35%.
Halved.
Basically. That kind of structural change makes it much, much easier to pass massive fortunes down through generations. It reinforces dynastic wealth and makes that concentration likely to persist and even grow.
So we've traced this lineage, haven't we, from Carnegie's industrial muscle and labor division
To Rockefeller's monopoly building and illusion maintenance.
through Vanderbilt's sheer will and Hughes' technical lock-in.
Then into the modern era of financial LBOs, millisecond HFT advantages, co-location.
And finally, the tech titans' intense culture and the leveraging of wealth for media control and political insulation by figures like Hearst, Maxwell, and Rockefeller.
It really feels like the core lesson across all these sources, all these eras, is that building and maintaining this kind of dynastic or highly concentrated corporate power isn't just about playing the game well.
No, it's about setting the rules. It's about actively writing, defending, or sometimes fundamentally rewriting the rules of the economic and political game to favor that concentration.
And that brings us right back to what feels like the central challenge today. The lack of real democratic oversight, democratic scrutiny over this massively accumulating wealth.
Because capital is so mobile, so global.
And the structures to shield it are so sophisticated, the concentration just keeps accelerating. And the issue isn't just the inequality itself, however troubling that is, it's the power that comes with that wealth.
The power to influence policy, to shape the economy, to impact all of our lives, often without much public input or control.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. It's a challenge, really, drawn directly from the implications of the source material we've discussed.
The sources hints that maybe the most effective way to counter this endless inegalitarian spiral, as one put it, and to bring this power back under some form of democratic control would be something like a progressive global tax on capital.
A tax designed not just to raise revenue, but specifically to force transparency, to expose wealth to democratic scrutiny.
Now, okay, a truly global tax might feel utopian, maybe politically impossible right now.
Almost certainly. So the question becomes, if that global solution's off the table for now, what practical steps could be taken at a regional level, a national level?
What specific, achievable, structural safeguards could be put in place today to ensure that capital accumulation, which, let's face it, is part of a dynamic economy, actually serves the broader public interest, not just purely private or dynastic aims?
What measures could ensure wealth concentration doesn't completely overwhelm democratic control?
Something to think about as you watch the next generation of titans continue to build, innovate, and inevitably try to shape the rules of the game.
Definitely something to chew on.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.